Redditors who have worked around death/burial, what's your best ghost story? You/addicted punk responded. I used to be a security guard at a hospital. One night, while doing my rounds, I went into the surgery wing and was walking down a hallway when I saw a doctor looking at the whiteboard where all the scheduled surgeries are written down. I said, "Hello doctor," and kept going. The doctor didn't say anything back, just kept studying the whiteboard. When I got back to the security office, I was telling one of the guys that's been there for years about how I greeted this doctor and he didn't say anything back. I asked if that's the asshole they told me to watch out for. I was asked where I saw him and I said the surgery ward, and he gave me a smirk. He then explained that the surgery ward closes at 9 p.m. and that all patients are moved into the monitoring wards. There should be no one there. He then asked me if this doctor was studying the schedule board. I said yes, and he then told me that I just met Dr. Lewisity. Apparently, some many years ago, one of the surgeons went up to the helipad and jumped off the building. Seems like he never stopped working though. You/MC_NME responded. Junior doctor on the wards, doing a night shift, called to verify a death. Enter the private bay. It's all a bit grim, slightly gloomy room. Patient is lying there, old man, looks peaceful. Start my checks, stethoscope out, no signs of active respiration. No heart sounds. Rub the sternum for a response. None. Time to get closer and check the CNS for any signs of life. I lift the eyelids up, reach for my pen torch, balancing closer to the patient. That's when it happens. The patient lurches forward, his face now inches away from mine. I scream. Nurses rush in and ask what's happened. What was that noise? Why so pale? You look like you've seen a ghost. That's when I realize. I leant in too close and my leg brushed against the bed controls, raising the bed. Nurses couldn't stop laughing as they offered to make me a cup of tea. You/Demonia Sturbo responded. Not me, but a colleague found a dead person in a dark smoke-filled burned-out building during the mop-up of firefighting operations. As unfortunately happens sometimes, you find them by stepping on them. If they're still intact you kinda bounce off them. If they're fried, you can often crunch them up pretty bad under your heavy boot. Well, this guy stood right on a badly burned corpse's sternum. Crunch, right into the chest cavity. When he tried to pull his foot out it got stuck on the ribs and the body came up at him. Burned up arms flailing about. Took him a few tried with what looked like a zombie stuck on his leg. He needed quite a bit of counseling, poor dude. You/Spartan M00 responded. I have a million that are more grotesque and gory than this one, but it stands out to me. I was once working at a mortuary and had to go pick up a man from the medical examiner's office. When you do that, at least where I'm from, you get a receipt when they release the body to you. The receipt has all of the personal belongings that are with the deceased. When I brought the man back to the office I opened up the body bag to make sure all the belongings were there and double-checking the receipt. When I opened up the bag I was stunned to find this dude looked almost exactly like me. He was my age, had similar tattoos in similar spots, had the same long hair I do, even had the same style of jewelry I was wearing. It took me so off guard that I stood there in an existential crisis until the embalmer came in and was like, "Hey Spartan M00, how's it going? Ah, holy shit, that guy looks like you." It's the only case LV had nightmares about. I'll be the one in the body bag with the deceased man opening me up. You/Mycotiscald Frodo responded. I used to work in a nursing home. The residents in certain rooms would complain about a man in their room at night, but hallucinations are common in the elderly, so it wasn't really noticed. One night I was moping the dining room, which had huge windows overlooking the garden. It was around 1 a.m., so pitch black outside and low lighting inside. I had this horrible feeling of being watched, so looked up and reflected in the window was a man behind me. He had a brown suit in, a bowler hat and the cruelest look on his face. He grinned and his mouth was too big. This happened in seconds, and when I turned around there was obviously noon there, but I'll never forget that look of evil on his face. I paid more attention to the residents after that and they'd all seen the same man. He just enjoyed terrorizing people. You/Chemistry Least responded. I used to be a driver for a funeral home corporation. Like, drive the hearse and pick up the bodies. Never had anything creepy happen, a few funny things, a few traumatic things. In general it was a chill job. However, I did get incredibly uncomfortable one night picking up a man who died at home. He still had the defibrillator leads on his chest and his eyes were closed, which is unusual because the eyes are always open. He just looked like he was asleep or unconscious. Not rigid or pale or anything. I just had this sinking feeling for about half an hour in traffic that he was going to suddenly gasp and wake up in the body bag. Then it hit me. That would be the coolest thing ever. I'd take him home and he'd be back with his family. So I just kind of drove slowly and turned up some music and sang along and talked to him. When I got him to the funeral home, Elle left him out of the cooler for about an hour while I did paperwork and played on my phone. When I got another call, I checked on him and his limbs had started to stiffen. I was kind of bummed. I put him in the cooler and went on my next call. Which Githa responded. Elle used to work on an oncology ward as a nurse. Our side rooms were kept for end-of-life patients on palliative care, and one patient that we had been nursing for a good few weeks died early one morning. Last offices had already been done by the night staff and the patient moved to the hospital morgue, so all that remained was to clear the room of personal belongings and tidy up. I sent a student nurse that I was mentoring at the time to do this whilst got on with the drug round. The student had known the patient fairly well and was comfortable with this job. About 10 minutes after, a colleague came to me and told me that my student had come flying out of the side room white as a sheet and was sobbing in the staff room. I went to find out what the problem was, and the student told me she had been clearing out sink area in the bathroom, had glanced up and seen the deceased patient reflected in the mirror looking at her over her shoulder. My student was a sensible girl, not given to hysterics, but for the remainder of her placement on that ward she would not go near that side room. McFeely_SmackUp responded. Not a ghost story, but when I was in the army, I served on a few honor guard duties for transporting soldiers' remains. One time we were taking Korean War-era remains that had been uncovered in Korea and transported to the USA for identification. For most of the remains, the transfer cases, industrial aluminum caskets, were very light, like you'd expect with 40-year-old remains. A couple of the cases were heavy, like a couple 100 pounds. I've never stopped wondering what was in those cases. It wasn't 40-year-old bones. _aromatic_razzmatazz replied to this with, well shit. Maybe they had to be transported in situ, so if they were found in concrete or something, that feels like an awful lot of work to go to though. I kinda wanna know now WTF was in those caskets. _tornado_messiah responded. Might be a little tangential, but bear with me. For many years, I was in the US Navy based in Japan. After the tsunami hit Fukushima, we spent a few months off the coast resupplying helicopters that were ferrying supplies and searching for bodies of people who were washed out to sea. When we did find a body, we were instructed to put them in a body bag and store those bags in an area called the Starboard Castleway, sheltered area outside of the pressurized interior, until a Japanese Coast Guard helicopter could come by to retrieve them. For a while after we were finished with that mission, some of my shipmates reportedly saw ghosts in that area of the ship. I didn't see any ghosts, but it was not uncommon for me to feel some unnatural chills there. _confident_guard 6798 responded. My grandfather died a while back. One day me and a bunch of my cousins were playing in the front yard, rural area, since on weekends all the family likes to hang out together. So we're out having fun and see Lolo, grandfather, walking towards the house. We all greet him and he smiles at us. He walks up the porch into the house and hangs his hat by the door. We continue playing until we hear crying from the inside of the house and my uncle driving fast up the driveway. We all rush in to see what's going on and see everybody bunched up in the kitchen crying, telling us that Lolo died early that morning and they just found out. He lives a few towns away. We looked at each other and told the grown-ups, nah, we just saw him come into the house. They didn't believe us and we told them that he really did not that long ago, and he even hung up his hat by the door. So everybody rushes to the door and his hat was hanging right where we said it was. He doesn't ever go anywhere without that hat. So me and my cousins are running all over the house calling for him while our parents are so quiet and freaking out. He actually did die earlier that morning and my grandmother couldn't find his hat anywhere in their house. We left the hat where it was and nobody ever touched it. _Moroccan Suede responded. I used to work as a nursing assistant in assisted living communities. Usually when a resident started to need hospice they were transferred out to a higher level of care, so I didn't see death for a long time. When I first started, my favorite resident, let's call her Marilyn, would play Scrabble with me. She was completely alert and oriented. Sometimes she likes to sit quietly with an iPod shuffle clipped onto her vest and these huge headphones. She loved music. Slowly she started to decline. I would help her get ready for bed and she would get upset when she forgot how to do something. The only thing that calmed her down was playing music off my phone. She liked Frank Sinatra and the Beatles. Her independent ability declined rapidly and soon she was bedridden. Still, loved listening to music. This was during COVID, and her quality of life was diminishing so quickly that we didn't transfer her out. She had an apartment at the facility with all her belongings where she was comfortable. By the end her dementia had progressed to the point that she couldn't remember how to swallow. Marilyn passed away with me, the head nurse and her family at her bedside in her apartment, Unit 202. I did her post-mortem care afterwards, styled her hair how she liked to wear it, even clipped her little iPod onto her shirt. A few days after she died, a woman in 203, her neighbor, kept wandering into the lobby during night shift, always at 3 a.m. She complained of loud music coming from Unit 202. That apartment was vacant, just full of Marilyn's belongings. She said the music was so loud it was deafening. Whenever the night shift worker went to check, he didn't hear anything. Missy Mapin responded. When my cousin was 18 he was in a bad wreck and his girlfriend and her sister were all pronounced dead at the scene. The police arrived to inform my aunt, his mom, and she asked that he be sent to a specific funeral home. While they were preparing to embalm him he raised up and asked, "Where the hell am I?" The funeral director said it was the first time he ever had to go home and change pants. I should add that the top of his head was open and his brain was exposed. He was sent to the hospital. The same police officer came to my aunt's to tell her he was not dead but in the hospital. They thought he'd be in a vegetative state. But a few weeks later he walked out of the hospital. My aunt said it was the worst and best day of her life. The lonely scientist responded. Mom told me stories when I was growing up. Her first job out of nursing school was an RN in the ER of an old hospital in Virginia in the mid-1980s. There was the Man in the Hat and Patient 1. Most of the nurses had stories about them. The Man in the Hat would show up and stand outside of rooms after visiting hours. The patients often died soon after. Patient 1 was a woman in a very old hospital gown. She'd walk in the halls before entering random rooms. Those patients usually coded. They took the man to be an omen of death and the woman to be a heads-up to grab the crash cart. Outrageous Onions responded. I used to be a nurse assistant on a cancer floor that also served as the hospice floor. The number of times a patient would pass and be removed from a room, only to have that room's call light continue to go off without anyone inside was just nuts. And before you say maybe the light was just damaged or moved strangely in the process of removing the body, that's the only time it would happen. Broken call lights, in any other circumstance, just wouldn't come on at all. Bitchy Houseblunt replied to this with. I was doing additional care for my husband's great-grandmother during the months before she died at an assisted living center. I became friends with some of the staff and they always said when there was a death the call light thing would happen in that room all night or for at least 24 hours. I'm not sure at this point if it's an urban legend or what, but it would also happen in rooms that had been empty for months on occasion. They never did seem to have call light issues in rooms that were occupied. Deleted responded. I worked as a nursing home assistant for a bit prior to grad school. I worked for a private nursing home where I would rotate between 3 different houses. Each house held 6 residents and 2 staff members. When I first started, all the residents were women. One time my coworker and I were in the kitchen prepping lunch for the ladies when we heard a loud voice screaming, "Help me! Help me!" We exchanged a quick glance and immediately scrambled away to check on our respective residents. No one was present on my half of the house, so I went back to the kitchen. My wide-eyed coworker was there waiting for me with a perplexed expression on her face. I asked her if she had heard the voice too and she responded that yes she did but that there was no one present on her side of the house. We simultaneously looked outside and saw every single one of the residents outside enjoying the rose garden. It was in that moment we both realized the voice we heard was distinctly male. I came to find out that prior to my employment there was a male resident who was a WW2 veteran with PTSD that had passed there. He would frequently hallucinate and scream for help prior to his death. Shillam562 responded. Not me, but my mom's ex's story. My grandpa was the mortician for a small town in the late 60s. The morgue was attached to the house that my mom lived in. That's just how it was and it didn't bother her. One day her boyfriend, Tom, came over to the house and no one was home. They had been dating for a while and he was comfortable going inside and waiting for my mom to come home. On the way into the house Tom noticed that the door and windows into the morgue were open, so he checked it out, found it empty, closed everything and went into the house. A few minutes later he heard a loud slamming noise come from the morgue, so he ran to see what was wrong and found that the doors and windows had been thrown fully open again. He got out of there real quick. When he told my grandpa about what happened, my grandpa just calmly explained that they had picked up Mrs. that morning and the spirits were there welcoming her and visiting with her. Next time Tom should just leave the doors and windows open. Deleted responded. I work in long-term enhanced care. People don't get better but we keep them comfortable. A couple stories I can think of. 1. A husband and wife both with severe, almost non-verbal dementia in the same room but different beds. I have my back to the husband as I'm turning the wife who is facing him. Suddenly her eyes get wide and she looks terrified. She says, "He doesn't look very good with his face blue like that." I'm like, oh shit, did he die? But when I turned around he was alive and sleeping. I don't know what that woman saw. 2. A tall shadow man on one specific unit. Multiple people have seen it, some even following it into rooms thinking it's a patient, but then no one's there. 3. There was a man who had a cardiac event while sitting on the toilet. He fell forward and put a hole in the bathroom wall. He died. Soon after, a new woman moves into the room after everything is fixed. She comes out to the nurse's station one night pissed off. She says, "Who's going to tell that man to get out of my room? And when are they fixing the giant hole in the bathroom?" 4. A very nice family was sitting with a resident while he died. The man had been basically comatose for 2 days already. The sister comes out and asks for a Bible. This was not a religious family. She said he had sat straight up, eyes bugged out and started screaming, then flopped back down. I was like, say no more, and found her a Bible.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video you might enjoy the rest of my content. Check it out.